It's an absolute honour and pleasure to welcome you here. For those of you, I think most people know who I am, but for those who don't, I'm Ali Capper. I chair the NFU's Horticulture and Potato Board, and I'm in my 6th year as chair. Not quite sure how that happened. It's my last year, so there'll be somebody new next year. You'll be so pleased to hear. This is a fantastic sector to represent, and I've really loved every minute of it. But it is fair to say that it's probably now facing more challenges than it's ever faced. Our first session this morning on labour has always been the number one issue for the sector, and I'm sure will continue to be. We, of course, are also going through a pretty bumpy ride with our R&D and the future of AHDB or something new. I had hoped by now that we would have had a minister's response to the ballot. Sadly, we haven't, and it looks like we might be faced with a summer of waiting. So there's a lot to say on that, and if anybody wants to ask questions on that in the productivity session, which is our second session today, please don't hold back. Very happy to deal with questions on that. The whole future funding piece for our sector and what may or may not come forward for horticulture under the ELM scheme is another area with challenges because income foregone does not work for horticulture. I've been saying that very loudly and very clearly for the last 2 or 3 years, and I think somebody might be starting to listen. I hope they are. I think another new issue for all of us is inflation. Not just wage inflation, but everything is inflating. I understand that insulation board has gone up 100% in the last 3 or 4 months. So anybody who's got any capital projects, what I'm starting to hear is they're now starting to think about delaying them. And delayed investment is never good for a sector that wants to grow and move forward. So inflation is something which everybody is going to have to face into, including our customers. The sustainability agenda is one which I think is really exciting for our sector because I think we've got a lot of really positive messages, and I think that we will see a lot more from the sector this year on the sustainability piece. So trying to find the sort of the upsides, I think sustainability is a really positive message for our sector. There's a lot of really amazing work being done, whether that's biodiversity, whether it's water capture, whether it's IPM. There's lots of really positive stuff coming forward. And we have a couple of other bits of good news. I know that labour is a challenge, but we are the only sector that has a seasonal workers scheme, which I'm really proud of. I know it's not enough. I know we've got hundreds of challenges, but at least we've got the scheme in place. And of course, the message to government this year is that we need that pilot made permanent for next year and beyond. And the final bit of good news is that we now know where we are with producer organisations for the next couple of years. So quite a few of us had an email yesterday afternoon, and the really good news is that after quite a lot of lobbying by a number of people in this room, we now know that there will not be a gap between current programmes and the new scheme in 2024, which I'm delighted by. So just to end on a bit of good news, welcome to Fruit Focus. It's a great show. It's usually very hot. This might be the hottest ever. So as I say, stay in the shade and make sure that you're drinking lots of water and have a great day. We're going to start straight away now with the labour session. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. Ali has to take a seat. She's not off duty today. As well as taking part in this session, she's going to be chairing the next one as well. And just a reminder, the following session on productivity, we are going to have someone from DEFRA, Jackie Rawlings from DEFRA, coming in to speak in that session. So that very recent announcement on POs, it's a great opportunity to learn a bit more about that and question DEFRA directly. So please do stay for that. As the chair of this session, I'll try and make sure there's at least a 5-minute gap in between this and the next one so that people can go and get some, have a comfort break, get some water and find some shade if you're currently stuck in the sunshine. But thank you all for coming. Different setup to usual. We're a little bit more crammed in. So we're all going to stay in our seats because there's no lectern and I'll be sorting out slides, etc. Of course, a year cannot go by without talking about labour. It has been the top priority for the sector for many years. And actually this year has probably been the most challenging yet, obviously with the end of freedom of movement playing a big part in that. But of course, COVID, nobody knew that was coming the last time we were all physically here. I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers to this particular session. I'm going to go from the end onwards. So Simon Bowyer, Chief Executive of Concordia. Of course, Concordia, one of the larger labour providers, but also one of the operators of the pilot scheme. Keith Johnson, I'm delighted to welcome Keith. He's an employer advisor and Fuller Working Lives lead. I had to read that. At DWP, locally in the Maidstone area. But Keith actually has been taking part in the meetings that the NFU's had with DWP at a national level and providing lots of local insight into that. So I'm really pleased to have Keith here. And of course, Ali Kappa needs no introduction, but actually introduced herself earlier. So chairman of our Horticulture and Potatoes Board, and has been a figurehead and leading on the policy work from the NFU's point of view on securing the seasonal worker scheme and all the sort of exemptions and etc. around it. So we'll keep this to roughly 10 minutes, maximum 10 minutes per speaker, and then we'll have a decent Q&A session. And like I say, I'll try and make sure there's a gap between this session and the next. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Simon to speak first to talk about the issues with pilot scheme and EU settled status. Simon.
Thanks, Lee. So yes, as Lee said, my name's Simon Bowyer. I'm Chief Executive of Concordia. We are one of 4 operators of the seasonal workers pilot scheme, and we were one of the 2 original operators of the scheme. So we've been involved with the seasonal workers pilot scheme for about 3 years now. If you could go to the next slide for me, please, Lee. So previously, prior to Brexit, we had freedom of movement from the European Union, and it was relatively achievable to get large numbers of Eastern European workers over here at fairly short notice and in reasonable numbers. Since the beginning of this year, that's changed. So there are now 2 routes by which you can employ workers from overseas. One is EU workers with settled status, and the second one is the pilot scheme. I think there was a belief amongst labour providers and government, and indeed growers, that there would be a reasonable pool of EU settled status, because we'd heard these figures of 5 million people applying for settled status, and it was therefore thought that there would be a fairly large pool of labour available. That has proved not to be the case, and there is no definitive answer as to why that is, other than that there are many other sectors who require this labour, and we're competing for a limited pool of EU workers with settled status who want to come over here and work on farms. If you could go on to the next slide for me, please, Lee. If you have EU workers on your farm at the moment, the deadline for them to apply for settled status was the 30th of June, so you've missed it. But the good news is there is a 28-day derogation. So if anyone wants to leave now to go back to their farm to fill in some application forms, you need to do it soon. But seriously, it's pretty much gone. Now, if you haven't got settled status for your workers, then you won't be able to employ them in future. The rules are that you had to check their ID card when they came to work on your farm, and that was sufficient proof that they had the right to work. From now on, you have to ensure that they have settled status. At the moment, the guidance is that you don't have to go back retrospectively and make checks for people you're already employing, but I wouldn't rely on that. That could be changed at any moment. So the regulatory regime about employing workers from overseas has changed completely. In terms of EU workers with settled status, the number of them available is probably about 50% of what we expected it to be, so a lot less. And I was having a discussion with Lee about this the other week. That is a diminishing pool, because it's very hard to attract new people to come and work on our farms. We're mainly dealing with a pool of people who return year after year, and that's going to diminish year on year as people retire or move into other sectors or other jobs. So this EU settled pool is there. We can use it as much as possible at the moment, but it is a diminishing pool. So that leads me on to the second way in which we can bring workers over from overseas to work on UK farms, and that's the Seasonal Workers Pilot Scheme. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Lee. So Seasonal Workers Pilot Scheme. I'm going to assume that people here aren't familiar with the scheme. Many of you may be. But to start from the beginning, the Seasonal Workers Pilot Scheme was set up as advanced planning for what would happen after Brexit. And it was only set up with a lot of lobbying from Ali and various growers around the country, realising that this was going to be an issue. So it started in 2019 with 2,500 licenses allocated between ourselves and Proforce. So a limited number to see how the scheme would work. There are a lot of reporting requirements around the scheme. There's a lot of monitoring on the scheme. It's a lot more onerous than it was just employing somebody under freedom of movement. But they wanted to do that to see how the scheme would work. It was successful in 2019, so it was expanded in 2020 to 10,000 licenses, again shared between two operators. Unfortunately, that expansion didn't happen until towards the end of March, which is when COVID hit and lockdown hit. And we ended up doing all sorts of exciting things like chartering planes to come over here because scheduled airlines had stopped running. So we got involved in all kinds of activities that we'd never been involved in before to try and get people over here to work on UK farms to make sure we had enough labour. Both of the pilot scheme operators didn't manage to use all of their licences in 2020 because it was so late in coming through and because of the difficulties of actually getting people over here. So in terms of how it works, the workers who come over here are sponsored. There are now 4 operators of this pilot scheme. That's ourselves, Proforce, Fruitful and AG, and we are the sponsors of the workers. So we provide a sponsorship certificate, which amongst other things means that we are saying we're responsible for the welfare of those workers. We'll make sure that they don't fall into destitution, and we'll make sure that when they come to work on your farms that they're properly looked after. So we are the sponsor, and ultimately responsibility rests with us. However, if you take one of these workers, you are the employer. So the responsibility for all the normal things like health and safety, making sure you pay the national living wage, all those things rest with you. And there is a certain amount of reporting that we require you to do back to us that we then hand on to DEFRA. So there are more responsibilities around employing these seasonal workers. The length of the visa is fixed at 6 months. So from the day they come here, they have 6 months when they can work, and then they have to go back home. And they can't come back until 6 months after the end of their previous visa, which caused a bit of a problem last year because everyone was late because of COVID. So we did manage to get an exemption this year so that they could come back a bit earlier. But essentially it works on a 12-month calendar. So they're here for 6 months, away for 6 months, and then they can come back. The cost of the visa is something that we are trying to work with government on. It's a major portion of the cost of somebody coming over here. It's £245 for the visa, and for Bulgaria and Romania, it's another £55 as well. That's just a legislative thing to do with the way the visa offices are set up. So it's actually more expensive for a Bulgarian or a Romanian to come over here than anyone else. There is a change in what we're seeing in terms of the cohorts of workers coming over here. I think under freedom of movement, we've been increasingly getting to the point where the age group, the age cohort was increasing. We're finding we have access to a pool of much younger and fitter workers, but the flip side of that is they have higher expectations. So people who've invested in their caravans, in their on-site facilities, you'll be good to go. They particularly love Wi-Fi. So if you haven't got Wi-Fi on your farm, please get it. So there are different expectations, and they need to be managed slightly differently as well. Younger workers, they do appreciate trips off the farm. Some of them are here as well as to work. They want to get a cultural experience. They want to come and see what Britain's like. So anything you can do to facilitate that goes down really well. Other than that, I think now we're in the 3rd year of the scheme. We have 30,000 licenses, and I think without that pilot scheme, UK farms would be in a bit of trouble in terms of getting all the labour that they needed. So it has worked well. It's been very successful. I think the farms on the whole have had a positive experience. We look forward to it being, I hope, expanded again next year, but we don't know, and we won't know for a while. DEFRA and the Home Office tend to take, as they should, take their time considering these schemes, and therefore we might not know until the very end of this year. So I won't be able to, as soon as I've got information on that, I will give it to you, but at the moment we don't know. So that's my little piece on seasonal workers pilot scheme, and I think we're going to take questions at the end. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you. So thank you, Simon. Yeah, we will take questions at the end. I'll hand over to Keith now. Just a quick comment before Keith speaks. We've heard about the two main routes to recruitment: the seasonal worker pilot scheme, 30,000 currently, and of course those with EU settled status or pre-settled status. We have been set a challenge by the UK government to employ more British workers in seasonal roles as well as in permanent roles. And last year, of course, we ran the Pick for Britain campaign, which was very good publicly. It raised a lot of awareness, but wasn't very successful in actually converting interest into actual recruits. So what we've been doing this year is working closely with DWP to try and find a way where we can manage this at a more local level through those job centres and through the sort of regional teams. And so we've invited Keith here today just to take us through that process. We know it's challenging, but actually I've been really, really pleased and delighted with the level of engagement and support we've had from DWP. And I think it's an opportunity to take advantage of that. So I'll hand over to you, Keith.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all today. So my name's Keith Johnson. I'm what's called an employer advisor at Maidstone Job Centre. And every job centre has at least one employer advisor, and they come out and engage with employers, basically. That's what we do. We talk to local employers and see how we can either promote their vacancies or even physically help with the recruitment process. And that's what I'm going to go through today, just to outline the different methods we can use to help your recruitment. What I outline here isn't prescriptive, and we can be imaginative. We can adapt to what you want as well. So it could be bits of what I'm going to outline, maybe other things you think of that we hadn't thought of, but it'll be through speaking with you that we'll do that. And I hope to speak to a lot more of you today. So thank you for inviting me. So these are the main ways I think we can help with your recruitment. So the top two are really engaging with the employers and getting them to meet the work coaches in the job centre and the employer advisors, of course. So either by the employers coming to the job centre and talking maybe at their meetings, their team meetings. That's a great way to engage with the work coaches, because the work coaches are going to be selling the jobs to the job seekers, and if they know the jobs, what they're selling, and the employer they were selling it to, that helps the process so much better. And what has really helped in lots of different sectors, and I know it has worked in the agriculture, is the job centre actually coming out and visiting the workplaces, seeing the reality of what it is. Because I think all of us who've not worked in that sector have in our mind an idea of what it is, but don't know the reality. And, there's lots of things, negatives maybe, if you want to put it as that, they may not know, but there's also lots of positives about the job that they may not know about. So giving them the reality of that would really help, I think. The next thing is something we call mentoring circles. Now, in the job centre, we're very good at naming things for something that bear no meaning to what they are. So mentoring circles are basically an employer sitting in front of a lot of job seekers and telling them, so that's why it's circles, I suppose. Instead of mentoring one-to-one, you're mentoring a group of job seekers. So telling them about job seeking in general maybe, but job seeking and working in the agricultural sector. So it's improving the employability of these people who are looking for work, but also selling your vacancies and your work to them, to people who may be curious about it, may not know anything about it. So they're really, really useful. And then we've got something called Kickstart that I don't know if you know about, but it's a really good scheme. It's for young people aged 18 to 24. It's to give them work experience placement, so a 6-month placement that is paid for by the government. The government pays their wages for 25 hours a week at the national minimum wage. Also pays a grant to the employer for each person of £1,500. And what it has to, there is a condition on that. It must be not replacing current employment, so it must be in addition to current employment. So the idea of it is to give young people who are, let's face it, they're probably fairly disadvantaged compared to everybody else out there. So to give them some meaningful work experience that they can then take on and hopefully use as a career. So there is that great little scheme. I can give you details about that later. And the final one I've got on there is sector-based work academy programs, or we like to shorten that to SWAPs. What that is actually I think I did have slides with explaining each one in turn. So if we could go on to SWAPs, please. Actually, could we just hover over the previous one for a little while? So that, in short, is just a brief description of what Kickstart is. But a lot of information there to absorb, but I'll be able to give you information later if you want. So yeah, if we could go to the next slide, please. So, sector-based work academy programs are basically a training program, but they must involve live vacancies, which is a big selling point of them. They have some pre-employment training in them. Now, that can be agreed, will be agreed with you as the employer and a training provider. Now, the training provider will do exactly what you want to do, and that training could be part of the training you already do now, but it will be given either by the training provider or by yourself before they're actually employed by you. So, at the cost of the government, as it were. So they would still be on benefit while they're doing that. And then they have a short work experience placement. In the last year, that has been virtual, so it may have been a video interview or a video talk or a video of the day in the life of somebody working, but it could be live work experience placement, a short one, anything from half a day to a week, whatever suits you. And then the employer's commitment under the SWAP scheme is that they give a guaranteed interview to everybody who completes the programme, which would usually be between 1 and 4 weeks, can be shorter. We have done shorter than that. And we can turn over these things in a very short space of time. I know when I have spoken to some farmers, they say, well, I need some people yesterday. We can turn these things over very quickly. And we've got a lot of experienced training providers who have either worked in that kind of industry directly or a similar kind of industry. But as I say, they would talk to you as the employers and arrange something tailored to you. Okay, and that is it in a nutshell. There is a lot more we can do at the Job Centre, but I'm hoping by talking to you all, we can help you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to me.
We'll take questions after Ali has spoken, but Keith, you are hanging around the show for the remainder of the morning, so if there's anything you don't get to ask sort of during the session now, feel free to grab Keith and talk through some of those things that he's just raised. So finally then I'll pass on to Ali Kappa, who will talk about the political landscape but also NFU activity.
Thanks very much, Lee. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so big brief, securing sufficient labour for the horticulture sector. Feels like a really big brief at the moment, and it feels really difficult. And it's all about evidence. The best evidence we've got for 2021 is what happened at the beginning of the year to the daffodil growers. And quite frankly, it's a bit of a shower. They had a 33% labour shortage. A third of the labour that they needed was not available. Everybody here who runs a growing business knows what that means. That means that everybody works longer and harder, or you don't pick the crop. And the next statistic is that there was a 24% crop loss. Anybody who is in a growing business knows nowadays it's the last 5% of your crop, which is where your profit is. So if you lose 24% of your crop, you are making a significant financial loss. And you may well be asking yourself whether you're going to choose to do the same again next year and put your business in the position where you don't have the labour. I think I know what most businesses will be choosing to do. And sadly, that's what we're starting to hear. 275 million stems of daffodils were not picked in 2021. That's an appalling statistic. They did manage to recruit 11% of UK residents. Remember, this sector, flowers and ornamentals, is not available they're not able to access the seasonal worker pilot workers. So they were entirely dependent on either UK residents or EU nationals. 2020 season data, the average hourly rate, and this is across the whole sector, was £10.35. We're hearing about wage inflation across the whole of UK industry at the moment. £10.35 is a long way above the minimum wage. So this is not about low pay. And I'll just say that again, this is not about low pay. Many good pickers in this sector are paid on a piecework rate, and the really good ones will be earning 12, 15, 18, 20 pounds an hour. So this is not about low pay, but it is about hard work, it is about stamina, and it is about working outside. And there are cultural challenges with all of that. In 2020, 36% of businesses experienced crop losses. 36%. That is a statistic that everybody responsible for our immigration policy should be ashamed of. The sector did achieve a recruitment rate of 9% of UK nationals, and it was a total, certainly this time last year, April, May, June, July, it was chaos last year because we didn't know where the borders were closing, EU nationals couldn't travel because of COVID, there were all sorts of challenges. In a way, I'm surprised that statistics aren't worse. And I think that speaks to the resilience of the growers in this sector, the resilience and the sheer bloody-mindedness and the entrepreneurship of the growers. It could have been a lot worse. 2021 year to date, we are experiencing a 10% labour shortage. That's January to June. But the June figure, which is to be confirmed, is 20% shortage, and that's the one that matters. The big labour numbers start appearing in our sector in late May. That's when the crops really need to be picked. January, February, March, April, and most of May don't really count. June is the month that we should be thinking about. 20% shortfall. So again, this is a sector that is being driven to the brink. It's a sector that is on the brink of a disaster if we don't sort this labour situation out. And it's one that for 6 years I've been personally lobbying for. And as I said at the beginning, I'm really proud of the fact that we've got a seasonal workers pilot. We are the only sector that has a scheme. But it's a scheme that's not bringing enough people, and that's evidenced by these numbers. This slide is evidence of the work that the NFU is doing. There's too much stuff on here. There's way too much stuff. If I went back 6 years ago, there would have been 3 bubbles. And now there are so many bubbles. Over on the right-hand side, you've got all the DEFRA engagement. And that's about providing evidence. It's about talking about what's needed this year and next year. But it's also about borders. And there are weekly emails about challenges that the labour providers, that farms are having with workers who are absolutely eligible to enter but are being turned away either by an airline or a border official or customs. So it's an endless stream of administration and nightmare and cost for the sector, because then the workers can't come for 24 hours or they can't come for a week. Cost. There's all the COVID exemptions. Every exemption we've got on farm is thanks to the NFU. All the exemptions for not having all the PCR tests that everybody else has to have, thank you to the NFU, and in particular Lee. Lee has worked so hard on this in the background for the sector. There is a team of people behind him too, but it's endless. The stream of emails and the stream of extra work that really we shouldn't be needing to deal with. It should be, the system needs to be much slicker. We are now wrapped up in so many rules that people don't understand. The border officials don't understand them, the airlines don't understand them. As soon as you start getting outside, well, even within the UK, they don't understand them, but you get outside the UK and it's a bit of a car crash. So we really do need to start streamlining the rules. The lobbying for MPs, many of you have been involved in this, and of course we're heading for another summer recess. Every grower needs to get their MP, or if they're covering a range of different constituencies, get every MP that your land covers out onto farm this summer and talk to them about the challenges and make sure they are left in no uncertain terms about the challenge that fresh fruit and veg production in the UK is facing. Every MP needs to understand this. I know you're all yawning because I ask you that every year. But if we don't keep our MPs engaged with this, it's very difficult to get what we need from the Home Office and from DEFRA. There's all the data and evidence. I've just given you a taster of it there. There's a monthly labour providers survey. It goes out to a large proportion of the industry. Please, please, please respond when you get that email. It's the only evidence that anybody is still collecting. I can't believe, but nobody in government is collecting monthly evidence from our sector, only the NFU. It's despite asking. There have been attempts, but there's still no regular collection by government to create the evidence base that's needed. So that NFU labour survey is critical. There is then a whole range of other stakeholder involvement, because guess what? This new immigration policy, we all know it's not fit for purpose. We all knew that when we were faced with the referendum result, and when we started to see what the government was lining up for us in terms of a new skilled immigration policy. We could all see the writing on the wall, and now we're starting to see the impact of it in every other sector in the UK. Every sector is screaming. The NFU has recently pulled together every sector that is connected with food and drink at all levels, from retail all the way down the chain to across the whole production landscape. So that's all the way through all the farming sectors, not just horticulture. It was a very difficult meeting, and there were some very strong statistics that were being discussed. The outcome of that is that an external consultant is being used to pull together evidence, because that's what we continue to need, evidence for government of how the food and drink sector is creaking, and how if we don't sort this out, we will not be producing food and drink to the same extent in this country going forward. So that survey is due out in the middle of August, and that will be forming the evidence base for government as to the changes that will be needed to immigration and other policy to keep us functioning and producing. I'm just going to move on to the last slide. So coming back to seasonal labour and our sector and what we need this year, but definitely for next year, are more permits and more operators. With the greatest of respect, and we've got, well, Doug was here. I think Doug might have gone because he was sitting in the sunshine.
Gone to man his stand.
Oh, he's gone to man his stand. Doug and Simon, who are two of the labour operators, there are two others. They're all working really hard for all of us, but 4 is not enough. And we really must get back to a situation where the large farm businesses are able to recruit their own labour through this scheme. It is just untenable that businesses that need to recruit 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 seasonal workers have to go through 3 or 4 operators to do that. They should be allowed to do it themselves. So we need more permits and we need more operators. This scheme must be open to the ornamentals and flower sector. Horticulture is stronger together. We will be mad to allow the sector to be split apart. Our issues are all very similar. There's not much difference to picking a daffodil as there is to picking asparagus. You might eat one and look at the other, but they are both very good for your health and well-being. So it's really important that we stick together. We must have a number of visas that is responsive to the labour availability challenge. And at the moment, it's so frustrating because, of course, all the evidence comes far too late for the year that you're in. I wish the government would listen to those of us that really understand this sector. If we are forecasting forward a shortage, they really need to listen to us. We're not making it up. We've never made it up. We've always told the truth, and the truth has always been based on the facts. Some of it's anecdotal, but every month the NFU team pull together, and some of the businesses are in the audience, we pull together a large call. Simon, there are often 20-odd businesses on that call, aren't there? Mm-hmm. And we go through every single business, and every business talks about what it's like today, what their labour availability is like, what their return rate's like, what their early leaver rates are like, and all that evidence goes into DEFRA. That is the most up-to-date evidence that we can provide, but it's the survey evidence, it's the historic evidence that government listens to, so it's very, very frustrating. Finally, our seasonal workers scheme is still a pilot. In year 3, it's still a pilot. That's just not good enough. So we need, I think the Secretary of State's words were durability. In fairness to George Eustace, he does get this. He knows we need a permanent long-term scheme. We also understand that it isn't just in his gift. It is a negotiation between DEFRA and the Home Office. But for those of us that aren't engaged with government every day, it seems like a fairly simple thing to achieve, surely. We just need that permanence. And my message is we need that permanence at the end of the year, which Simon was referring to, is just not good enough. If this sector is made to wait until the end of the year again, businesses will make decisions, and those decisions will either be to offshore their production where they've got overseas operations, or it will be to reduce or close up shop in the UK. Because why would you continue to go forward with a business where your biggest risk is labour? For some businesses, it's 40 to 70% of turnover. Labour cost can be 70% of turnover. If you're not sure you're going to get that labour, why would you go forward? You wouldn't. You're mad. Any economist, any consultant would tell you to stop doing that. So what we must have is an announcement soon. The end of the year is just not good enough. We got the announcement last year on the 23rd of December. The 2 new permanent operators did not get their licences until April and May. So that labour did not arrive on farm until July. It's too late. And the same will happen again next year if we don't get announcements until the end of the year. So we have to have those announcements now, not at the end of the year. So I know I sound like there's a lot of challenges. There are. This is a sector that I'm so proud of, and it's a sector that should be thriving. Those of you that heard the National Food Strategy announcements from Henry Dimbleby this week will know that fruit and veg were at the heart of that report, and it was about increasing production and increasing availability and increasing consumption. This sector can't do that without the policy measures that it needs, and labour is the #1 policy measure. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you for all the speakers for their contributions. Yeah, I think they deserve a round of applause.